I'm going to talk of Saturn Transits today. Oh my goodness, my Saturn return is coming is one of the most frequent comments I ever receive. And if you knew what a Pluto square was like, or a Neptune square, you wouldn't worry too much about your Saturn return, honestly. The difference is huge. And Saturn returns can be awful, but only if you're in denial of a fundamental part of yourself. If you're actually early in life able to understand the mystery of Saturn and just get it right, then Saturn returns will be fine. I remember mine was actually a delight because I was overdoing Saturn. I became very serious very young. Capricorn Ascendant, you see. We kind of tend to be very old, young, and then get very young when we're older. So it's said. So I've got this sort of strength of Saturn within my being. And when I did my Saturn return, it was like a weight lifted off my shoulder because I'd taken on too much burden. And I make this point just to indicate that all of the transits, every single one, bring back balance to an imbalance that exists. So in this case, because I've overdone Saturn, it rebalances to an appropriate level. But most people, they have not really taken on the burden of responsibility that Saturn demands. Saturn's fundamental meaning is to organize the interface between oneself and the community. This social contract is central to our life, our beingness. We have to have an environment of people because we can't live alone. It's impossible to live without interaction with the society that we have. And therefore, there's a contract set up between self and society. The self is required to do this, that, and the other. They got to do some work. They've got to obey the law. And they've got to fit in somehow, socially, somehow. Whereas society, in turn, has to operate justice, community projects, and so on. So there's this kind of symbiosis between self and community. And Saturn is that. It's how we do that. Now, the associations that we make with Saturn, like personal limitation and discipline and order and structure, well, if you think about it, those are the personal expressions of society's requirements of us. It goes beyond that, however, because society isn't silly. It's actually forming the best version of collective beingness that it can. And first of all, survival. The first thing you do is work out how to get your water, how to protect yourself from enemies and animals, how to grow food together. That's the first thing you do when you're creating a society. Survival things. It's only later that issues to do with law and order and morality and cultural expression become the main feature of society, but it starts to protect the group from the risks of death, basically. It's good stuff, you know. And if we actually understand that that is wisdom, not politics, then we come a long way with our Saturn energies. I blame the parents, of course, you know. I mean, parenting is badly done. And because parents don't actually bring their children up properly, the children then have problems with their Saturn relationship, typically in their 20s. It isn't okay to spoil your child. It isn't okay to do too much for your child, because then the child grows up to be unable to learn the Saturn lessons. And that can be very rough indeed in your 20s if you haven't had parents that have trained you to understand that you're inevitably going to have a social contract when you're an adult. Saturn is the process whereby we become adults, having been children. And if you don't actually train your kids fairly early on to be more disciplined than they'd like to be, then they're going to have a difficulty later. It would be inconceivable for you not to potty train your baby, wouldn't it? Because you don't want them shitting all over your living room. Well, take that one step further and you realise that it's a good idea to teach your child to know about household duties, doing the dishes, making the supper, cleaning the yard. If you get them to do that early in life, then when later society requires it of them, it's just normal. But most people are not sufficiently well trained in Saturn ways of thinking, ways of being, so they grow up, leave home, have to get their own life sorted out, and it's a shock. It's a terrible thing, because Saturn's teaching you something that must be learned. It's the way of life. So Saturn transits, especially the Saturn return, have all to do with this whole question of bringing your energies into alignment with social requirements. And that actually in turn is much more generally the case. It has a cosmic dimension as well. We're mirroring our sort of sacred duty in our social duty. It isn't only that we have to serve the community because the community needs it. It is the case that the soul cannot express itself fully unless there is an appropriate Saturn dimension to the personality. The soul can't just be willy-nilly and freely expressing itself on Earth. It's very much more sensitive than that and would be damaged actually by that process. The soul needs the ego to develop a strong sense of boundaries and correctness of behavior in order for it to behave properly itself. That's not something much well understood, I don't think. So Saturn's transits to other angles, let's say the ascendant and the descendant angles, you find a very stern sense of life. Like life is hard and it's difficult to come to terms with things, and it's a bit of a challenge even to do anything simply when you have Saturn on the ascendant. And you meet people with that position in their horoscopes, and they're very serious people, and they've got a burdensome life very often. And once again, I make the same point that's not necessary. They don't have to feel that way. They just have to get to grips with something that they have not yet done. You can be as philosophical as you like about whether or not you should be this, that, or the other. But actually, the fact is that you're not going to get away with having a free lunch. You have to earn your keep. You have to do your bit, or it won't work. And that will apply throughout the whole of your life. So those people with Saturn on the ascendant have fairly early in life to learn about that, to learn the need, to work out the formula that gives you what you must have, your food, your accommodation, your social position and so on. You have to work that out, however difficult that is. And very often this means gritting your teeth. And if you do that when you're a child at school, or perhaps at university, or very soon after, then you'll fit, But if you don't manage to actually find the discipline and the grit to do what you don't really want to do at the beginning, then you're going to have a problem with that, perhaps indefinitely. So Saturn is like a finger wagger. You have to do this, and it doesn't matter how much you dislike it, you're going to do it. That's the Saturn energy. So applied to the midheaven, you probably have learned how to do that and have taken a position in society as the finger wagger. So you're a boss, an authority figure, very likely. If you're having Saturn on the descendant, then very likely you're exploring that kind of energy in one-to-one relationship. And so there's an authority aspect to your involvements, let's say with your husband or wife. So that often shows as an age difference because age brings with it authority. But the primary purpose here is that one of you is more responsible and more aware of society's needs than the other, and actually starts to talk with that gravitas, that sort of authority, that older wisdom to the other, and that becomes the nature of the relationship. That's considered unhealthy in the West. It's considered entirely normal in China and in India, and it was in Native American culture as well. There's no fundamental judgment about having an age difference in your relationships, despite the judgments that the media like to throw at you because of it. Now, Saturn on the IC would mean that in your home life, there's a certain requirement for you to always be doing the right thing and taking care of someone perhaps and working out the finances. You would find your home life to be kind of burdensome until such time as you've got the message, and then an expression of authority. And you could either be the authority figure or subject to the authority of that relationship that is developed in the home. So that could be in a family sense, where one of your parents is a bit that way. They might have a job of a boss or an inspector or a supervisor at work, and they come home and they start inspecting your homework with the same diligent supervision and authority. That would be uncomfortable, and that would be your home life. And then you might grow up to be that way with your kids. So there'd be that aspect of discipline, and it can be perceived as harsh. It's not really the loving, relaxed vibe that we want in our homes to have Saturn on the IC. But when Saturn crosses the IC by transit, then you would actually have to work out your home life situation properly. Saturn transiting the Sun is a real mark of growing up. The Sun is our sense of self on a very deep essence level. And when Saturn crosses that, there's an inquiry made by life of us. Have you grown up? Are you actually in control of your urges? Are you able to form correct relationships with people? The whole package of being is measured by Saturn, and that might be a big challenge. You might actually have to do lots and lots and lots of things to grow up. The Saturn crossing the Moon has the same impact. You have to grow up, but in this case it's like on an emotional level. All of your childhood issues need to be looked at in a mature way now, and one of the ways is neediness for company, actually. So Saturn crossing the Moon can very often be a time of solitude, wherein you learn that being alone is okay. And for people that have not enjoyed loneliness or solitude before, this can be quite challenging indeed. But the freedom that you get from being happy in your own company is a tremendous reward, which only Saturn can offer. Saturn crossing your Mercury, it can make you anxious, fearful of the future, but it's actually meant to sharpen your thoughts or structure your thoughts, contain your thoughts so that it actually makes sense. When you think something, it actually makes sense. Quite a lot of people have this indulgence of mind where they just think anything they want to think and believe that it has meaning. It's just silly. The Saturn won't allow that. It will just sort of point out how silly you're being because you think nonsense. Saturn crossing Venus, rather like the descendant, of course, in some ways. So you might find that you find a relationship with a person with a different age to you, a significant age difference, or it could be distance, geographical distance. Saturn crossing Venus is not going to give you the total Venus experience that we want and talk about. It's going to make you curtail that a bit and say, look, the honeymoon period ends. Be serious now. Can we actually form a relationship? Is this symbiotic? Are we exchanging here? Is there a workable, realistic aspect to this relationship? That would be what you're dealing with. And so the people in your life would see you as rather serious now. Oh, you're no fun. You're not the life and soul of a party, are you? Or a party pooper, that kind of energy, is Saturn Venus. Saturn Mars. That's going to give you a greater challenge to get things done. Mars expresses itself outwardly, expressive, and Saturn is sort of upping the weight, the burden, the heaviness of that. If you cope with Saturn's transiting your Mars, then you strengthen your Mars. Saturn will bring that strengthening process, much like training for sports. You know, you're trying to develop your strength, and a trainer who does not put pressure on you is a waste of time. So Saturn is a trainer when it's applied to Mars. In fact, it's probably true generally. Saturn is the trainer, giving us a hard time so that later is going to be easier than otherwise it would be. Saturn-Jupiter transits, I see these as very positive in that Jupiter can be a bit overblown sometimes. Yeah, I can do that. And the gambler is Jupiter, Sagittarius, isn't it? So Saturn's saying, no, don't do that. You can't do that. If you want to do that, then we want this job list, these resources, these contacts. That's how you do that, you know. So don't do that unless you've actually worked it out properly. Because if you try and do that casually, it won't work. Saturn's just letting you know the Earth plane is burdensome, and so on. So that's basically what Saturn does in transit. It brings that sense of adulthood, responsibility, burden, overcoming burden, training you to be able to overcome burdens. And actually the sum total of all of this is moving towards gravitas, the gravitas of an elder. It is associated with eldership, being older, because age is what gives you the experience that requires you to deal with life. And that's what Saturn is giving you, the experiences that demand of you an adult, serious approach. So what's to gain from this is that you gain capability within society. You get things done, you're respected, you're honoured, and within oneself you feel this sense of capability. Yes, I can cope, I can achieve, I can, because I know how. It's not silly, it's a very definite formula. You deal with problems as they come up one by one, you deal with them properly in a responsible way, not expecting a free lunch. When you've lived like that for a long time, you develop this sense of gravitas. And that means that when you speak, people listen. They don't ignore your opinion. And yeah, that's the greatest joy of Saturn, probably.